I've just come back from a week's holiday, folks. So Fiona, just remind me again.
This episode is called Media Politics. Is it starting to come back to you now?
Yes, I remember. I remember where the idea came from, and I remember our guests as well. So we've 3 guests on the programme, haven't we?
We have.
Our first guests are Sylvia Willmot and Jane Davidson. And I got into a chat with them on a Facebook page. It was a whole thread about how to get our message across. So I thought, these two are thinking about this, and we thought, well, let's invite them on and see if we can take it a bit further. So what you're going to see and hear now is a bit of that conversation. The whole conversation is available on our Indie Extra YouTube channel. But for this Maybe's Eye edition, we've taken 10 minutes of our conversation. So here it is. I put up this graphic that I'd put together myself from figures that were on the website called Talking Up Scotland, which is run by John Robertson. He or one of his helpers had put together new data from NHS England for waiting times. So you might think, well, for goodness sake, surely it's been possible to compare Scotland and English NHS waiting times, but it hasn't been because of the way that they calculate things. So in Scotland, the length of time someone waits before either being sent home or sent up to a ward somewhere from an A&E department is calculated from when they enter the A&E department, which is what we mean, isn't it? That's what we kind of mean when we say, oh, I've been waiting 4 hours, or, you say, oh, I got out after an hour. But in England, they don't count it until there's been a decision to admit them. So they might have been waiting in the A&E for, a few hours before that. So it's never been possible to make comparisons. But I think it's the College of Emergency Medicine. They've been nagging away at the Office of National Statistics to try and get these figures published, because they were there, but they were never made public. So that's a bit of a long story, but that was the background to it. And the 3 of us just got kind of chatting about how good it would be. I remember you two in particular were saying, how are we going to get this kind of information out wider, out to the public?
So frustrating when you see all this stuff that's made. People have got public platforms and they can spread all this garbage, and you can only counter it to whoever's in your circle. It's how to get it out into a wider. These people have all got public platforms, and it's really, really weighted so heavily against. Personally, I'm going to get the salient points, things like the NHS, our GDP and where it comes from, and how the GERS figures. That's huge. I can't believe I'm still talking to people who don't know that our money all goes down to Westminster. There's a lot of ignorance. So I'm going to get it all into small cards. Salient points. Make sure they're all fact-checked. Make sure it's absolutely accurate, 100%. Yes. Put it in little cards, plasticize it, get 100 or something like that printed off, 200, whatever, cost-wise or whatever. And whoever I talk to, hand in the card. So it's not just my words going in one ear and out the other, and they don't really take it in. If you give them the written information, then maybe they'll pass it on. I say, well, you want to take a couple, give to your friends? I don't know. That's what I was thinking. There's nothing much else to do, is there, really, to get a public platform?
Yeah, so it's certainly very difficult, isn't it? That's a really good idea. Have you had any thoughts about it, Sylvia?
Yes, I've had many thoughts. I've got a field, which is actually my daughter's, but my garden is attached to it. And I've got a banner up, which is Believe in Scotland banner, independence is law. I just feel that's a bit, it doesn't really say anything for me. So I want to have a banner. I've asked somebody who does the graphics, and what I was going to put on it was the BBC and the media tell lies about Scotland constantly, well, which I feel is true. So that's something, that's my next step. But I was talking, strangely enough, to a neighbour who happens to be a farmer, who in the past would have voted Tory, but he's disgusted with the lies and the corruption. I was talking to him, and then I happened to mention I've been looking at PFI contracts that Labour put in place. And I'm appalled, and it's shocking. It's a scandal. That's a real scandal, because billions are going out of Scotland for these contracts. They're running for more than 30 years, a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And this is all stuff I've been gathering information. Dr. Megan Smith did an article about PFI contracts across the whole of the UK. And she's listed them all, and I went through them. Again, the interest rate generally on them is at 7%.
Wow.
The interest rate has been zilch in the last decade. Mm-hmm. The maintenance contracts are costing hugely more to do work than they would normally. It's just a license to take Scotland's money, to me. But, people may think it's not relevant now because they were set up when Labour were in place. But it still is. And where is this money coming from? I know councils apparently are paying 40 billion a year. Do hospitals come out of the NHS money?
I mean, you'd think probably if it was hospitals, that's coming out of a hospital local NHS budget somewhere. They've got to be able to cover it, don't they?
Yeah, this is what I wonder. Somebody put up this thing about Lord Jack McConnell on Facebook. It's saying, whilst he was in charge, he sent back 1.5 billion of accrued underspend in Scotland.
That's right, he did. Yeah, you kind of get to know, don't you, that some people are okay whatever you give them, but some people, if you obviously very kind of one-sided, but if you give out something that's just straightforward factual and it's got somewhere to go and look it up and check on it, actually that's a good way of proceeding, isn't it? Yes. So those wee cards that you're talking about, I think would be pretty good for that.
The other thing I was thinking, actually, Sylvia, what you're saying about the banner, I've got a flag, but one of the two Davies keeps saying, we're going to do it anyway. And I think that's quite a powerful statement. I mean, put that on a flag. Yes, we're going to do it anyway.
It's quite a positive one.
Agree with it or not agree with it, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, things are changing so quickly. You really, I feel, need to be constantly changing, as you say, and keeping up with what's happening to make it a kind of a statement against what's being said on the news.
Yeah.
That's kind of the problem as well. Timing's difficult, isn't it? Because something will flash up, and if you've then got to go and research and come up with something and draft it, and the moment's gone.
That's just take me back again to John Robertson's Talking Up Scotland, and I mean, he's just prolific. I mean, I'm on the email list. I mean, there can be several in a day, and each of them will have 2 or 3 sort of new examples. And he's very, very good at coming up with the factual stuff and where he's got it and what it means. And I mean, after chatting to both of you on Facebook that day, it did get me thinking again about all the effort that he puts into that. Really. I mean, he's got a lot of people on the mailing list, but I'm not sure it gets much further out. And you do have to put a little bit of effort in with that graph that I did with the comparisons with the A&E Times. I mean, I did that, but I used it. I got it from using the figures on his blog. I just thought maybe if I was doing something, if I was going to do something like that, I'd probably go to John's website and just pick out stuff and just try and get it a bit further, available, because it's like you're saying, Jane. If you give out maybe you give someone one of those cards once you get them done, and then they pass them on to their neighbour. even if it's just, oh, I met this woman and look what she gave me kind of stuff. Yeah, we're used to that, right? We've all been on stalls, we're used to that. But actually, it can still have an effect. It has a kind of outward ripple. And
this is why I thought it would be good to talk. Well, I talked to this neighbour because and why I mentioned the PFI contracts, and he actually admitted himself. He said, they're siphoning money out of Scotland because they're saying that people are turning away from the Tories towards the Labour, those who don't want independence.
Yeah.
I feel at the moment that's why that's so important to bring that back into the news again.
Yeah.
And it might be an idea to maybe emphasise Labour. And maybe we can say, look, this is really what you're going to be voting for if you vote for Labour.
Yes.
I don't know enough about the Labour. I must admit I haven't done enough research about the Labour and what they stand for and what they're going to do. But I listen to Starmer and I think, good God, when we will not be joining the EU, the Scottish, you will not get a referendum, and you look at them and think, excuse me, you're supposed to be the left-leaning party.
Thinking about Labour coming in, I mean, at least in, at Holyrood, anyway, Labour have been it's such a long time since anyone's been in power except the SNP that it actually you can kind of understand, unless you're old enough to have a very long memory, you can understand it. People just don't know. It's not even that they don't remember what Labour was like in Holyrood. They actually don't know because they weren't alive or, they weren't of an age where they paid any attention to it, really. So that's a good point. It's just another reason why we need out of the union, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. And the thing that gets me is all the people that will say, I can't stand the SNP. What have they ever done for Scotland? I just say, come on. I mean, we're going to go there. That's just too ridiculous.
When you're talking about little cards, do you know the number of people who don't appreciate the things that are free in Scotland aren't free in the rest of the UK? I mean, my mother lives in England and she's constantly surprised, outraged actually, at the thing that we get because that's what we as a society have chosen to do. Free education and free prescriptions and all that kind of stuff. Free bus travel. We've probably all got magic bus passes. She's not got that.
Of course we pay for it. It's just that the choice is different,
Yeah. Saying, Fiona, as you're saying, people don't even up here don't necessarily kind of realise that that's been brought in by the Scottish government and isn't available down south. Then you get the other side of that, which is the unionist argument that says, and look, English taxpayers are having to pay for Scottish free bus passes and free prescriptions and elderly care, and we're all paying that. And you're going, hang on a minute, do you think we don't pay any taxes?
This is horrifying to know how many people actually do think like that. Yes. You have casual conversations with people, which I tend to do. So here she comes. But don't know the internal market bill is going to level us all out, and they're not going to level up to us. They will level us down to them. Yeah. So be careful what you vote for. Young mothers with children think, what? You're going to lose your baby boxes or grandchildren. They're fantastic. They are fantastic. Yeah. My daughter always says, God, she says, for a new mother.
Labour would bring in charges for university because they did. They were the ones who started.
Yeah. How do you find ways of getting out that? Is it face-to-face? Is that the best way? I mean, your cards and your posters are both great ideas. If you can maybe get a conversation off the back of them. I think they could be great conversation starters. Yeah. But how else do you manage to do it?
For me, it's about getting people to think. So, making them question, the BBC and the media tell lies. It's like, just to raise that into their train of thought. And I think the cards, bullet points, it makes people think.
I think another thing that we really need to get our heads around is, and I think this is so powerful, if every yes voter converts one no voter, one no to yes, and that's it done.
That's definitely doable.
That's what got me round was Brexit, and it highlighted how much they lie. And then, of course, the ongoing corruption since then, which they make no attempt to hide. And that's why I think, for me, talking to this farmer neighbour, because he has brothers in the area and family, and they definitely were staunch Tory voters, but I can't see him ever voting Tory again. and I don't want him voting Labour either.
So that was an interesting chat, wasn't it? And it's only 10 minutes of a much longer conversation. So if you were enjoying listening to Jane and Sylvia there, hop onto our IndiePod Extra YouTube channel and you'll get the whole thing. In fact, I'll link to it below. So in that conversation, Marlene, I think you mentioned that we use material from John Robertson's website, and he's got a blog called Talking Up Scotland.
Yeah, that's right. Talking Up Scotland website. So sometimes what I do is I get email reminders of his posts, and there are several a day. I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of information that he puts out there. So sometimes what I do is I take the basic facts that he's drawing attention to, and I make some nicer looking graphs and put them on our website. But we also thought, well, there's someone else who's trying to get the message across, and he's been doing it since 2013. So John has a lot of experience, both good and bad, of trying to do that. So we invited him on.
Yeah, and he did have a lot of really interesting stuff to share with us. So here he is.
I have to admit, I mean, it's been 10 years, and posting. It's the blog that never sleeps. I post nearly every day of the week, and I tend to be. I'm a bit like, I often compare myself to someone who's standing in front of one of those tennis serving machines, and the balls are coming at me along the lines of what Reporting Scotland said. What? Whack! I send a response, but usually quite short. I don't write professorial pieces anymore. One or two of my contributors tend to write longer pieces than I do. My view is just get a quick answer in.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that is the Twitter as well. It lends itself obviously to the short, sharp, but it almost, if you don't get it in then and there, the moment's passed, doesn't it? Speed is essential.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what you're looking for here, in terms of principles, that's clearly it,
And then quickly on to the next thing. I must say, I've started doing that in Facebook groups. Actually, there's so much negativity in them. Anyway, maybe we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves.
We just leapt in there.
But thanks so much for coming and having a chat. I mean, I've been following your blog for years and years now, and then occasionally I'm quite a fan of spreadsheets, so occasionally I'll go and get more of the details and make a what I'm hoping is a helpful graph about it. I think I'm right in saying that back in 2013, wasn't it, that you authored a report about, was there fairness in the way it was being reported? To which that's right, fairness in the first year. So to which your answer was no, there isn't. There was definitely a bias towards coming down more on the side of the no campaign. And as I remember, that got you, I was about to say a bit of flack, but maybe it was a bit more than that. You certainly got the BBC down on. Well,
their PR man, in his attack on my research, he copied in the principal of the university and said that I had brought the university, UWS and the BBC into disrepute. And so, I mean, I think there was an implication there that they hoped I would be sanctioned in some way. I was a little nervous for a week or two until it became clear that my new principal just arrived from Tasmania via Northumbria. His view was a low-status university like UWS, any news is good news.
Presumably, you had confidence in your own methodology that you'd used.
I did. Although to be fair, I mean, the BBC had just appointed a group of graduates with a view to improving their coverage of the devolution process, and of the referendum coming up. Some of them are now your frontline presenters. About 10 undergraduates, and I gather they set them on my research to find anything they could, and they did find errors. I mean, all research has little errors in it. I mean, errors of the wrong date or the wrong person or something like that. Yeah. And they found those sort of errors, and the implications were therefore the whole thing was unreliable, which is it wasn't true. Been a bit of a new start for me. I mean, I've had a long-term kind of fondness for the for the independence movement, but as a young man, I was much more interested in kind of anti-imperialist thinking. I went to Stirling University in the 70s, did sociology, so you can imagine where my brain went at that point. And the research that the university encouraged me to do was not about Scotland, because, quite frankly, they thought that was low status work, and they encouraged me to do research into to the Western media's coverage of the Arab world and so on, or Western media's coverage of the economy, the global economy. So that's what I did. And it was only in 2013, as retirement loomed, I thought, what will I do next? And I was looking around, I was thinking, well, this is the big news at the moment, what's happening with the referendum coming up. I thought I'd do something about it. And up to that point, anything I'd published was lucky to get 100 readers, in peer-reviewed journals. And then I did that kind of preliminary survey. I initially sent it to Scottish Affairs, edited then by Lindsay Patterson, who was at that point. And he had said they would publish it after the referendum. That was the point at which I gave up on the whole game of peer-reviewed research and sent it to Newsnet. And they got 100,000 viewers in a week.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was just astonishing, the interest in that. Yeah, so that was the kind of history of it. And ever since then, it's been a 10-year grudge, me and the BBC.
And I mean, they're only getting worse, though, aren't they? I mean, my perception of the way they reported back in 2014. Okay, yes, there was a bias towards the status quo, and everything else was seen as the wrong answer. But I felt there was a kind of amused interest from a distance in it, whereas now it's just vicious. It's just, I mean, Marlene, you had an example that you were showing me earlier of a piece of information out of context. And I mean, this is just shocking standards of reporting, I think, as a non-professional.
Was that the one about the road deaths?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. This is from your blog, John. So there we go. You were just pointing out that BBC Scotland's headline was "Deaths on Roads Highest Since 2016," which I mean, they didn't have that graph there. You put the graph in. I mean, technically, it looks like it is the highest since 2016. But when you don't get the context of that whole, profile, it's more than misinformation, really, isn't it?
It's just dishonest. It really is. I mean, I was looking in the Guardian this morning, and they had an article in it about Mark Drakeford, who normally we quite like, Mark Drakeford, the Welsh FM. And he was talking about, that if we don't change the way the UK is, the relationship with the different bits, it's going to fall apart, which again, we agree with. And it was quoting this effort that he and Gordon Brown were going to have. And there was the future of these islands, some think tank that Gordon Brown set up. Yeah. And the whole article was from the perspective of the unionist right. Here's a threat to the union. Here's guys who are going to fight it. Here's a unionist think tank. Here's two unionist politicians to discuss it. And they're discussing, the threat of what's happening in Scotland and the danger of what could be happening in Wales. And again, no attempt at any kind of balance that these might be valid perspectives from Scotland or from Wales. Their paradigm just cannot conceive that might be a reasonable outcome.
Two things I would say about that. You make a very good connection with Wales there, obviously, but also the business of balance and the use of sources. About Wales, one of the things is that one of the most objective ways of demonstrating the bias in BBC Scotland is to look at the BBC and in the rest of the UK, including especially Wales, and look at the way they cover, the way they tend not to politicise. In reporting something that's bad news for Wales, you hardly ever hear in the same report mention of the Welsh Government. Anything bad in Scotland, it's almost always the case that you hear. Even if it's just at the end of it, the Scottish Government has said, they won't always be attacking the Scottish Government directly, specifically, but by mentioning the Scottish Government at some point in the report, they make a link in the audience's mind. The other point of that is that the business of balance, of using sources and so on. I've drawn attention to this a lot of time in the blog, and I sometimes do in a kind of mock teacherly manner, where I'll mark a piece of work by the BBC. Because although my main background is actually in teacher education, where I moved into the media area, I did do some work with undergraduate journalism students. And undergraduate journalism students have higher expectations than the BBC seem to have of their journalists. An first-year undergraduate journalism student would fail if they only used one source. They would fail if they used unreliable sources. They would fail if they only used one person as a source. They would fail if they didn't provide that kind of context. And if they were making a claim about something happening widely across the country and they didn't use statistics, they would fail.
One of the things that I I always really appreciate about your blog. I mean, maybe you could tell us a bit about how the blog arose as well, because it's been through various it had various names, hasn't it?
Mutations,
But
yeah.
But what I really appreciate about it is that often what you're doing is just pretty straightforward. You're just putting something into context. So that example with the road deaths is that's a good example. I found another one. I think actually this might even have been today. Starmer is up in Rutherglen campaigning.
It was today,
it was today. So, Margaret Ferrier. Now, Margaret Ferrier, of course, made a huge mistake doing what she did, travelling while she had COVID. Anyway, this by-election is going to happen, and he's up there, and he said Margaret Ferrier was missing in action as an MP. Yeah. I'm missing in action as an MP, and I kind of went and looked at had a look at what you did. So you obviously went on to Hansard, and Hansard is great actually if you want to get statistics out of.
I have to be honest here. I just saw somebody else had tweeted that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Good. So every one of these entries is when Margaret Ferrier has made some contribution or other to what's been happening at Westminster, and it's over the last year. So this is the MP who's apparently missing in action, and then there's the comparison with a certain Ian Murray, Labour MP, and I counted those up. It comes to 16 contributions over the last year compared to Margaret Ferrier's over 150. That's one reason why I just really appreciate the blog, whether you're retweeting someone else's or whether coming up with that information yourself. You put things into context. So
yeah, that was only minutes work. I think that must have taken me 15 minutes to do, and it's because when you're in the centre of a kind of swirl of social media, I keep seeing things. And I think I'll use that, and if it's something I can credit, I will credit. But that was Hansard.
So when did the blog itself start up?
It would be very early in 2014. I think maybe January 2014. Yeah. So it's pushing 10 years. It was because I'm 72 coming up, and working in the School of Media. I transferred from the School of Education to School of Media in my 50s, so I was getting a bit past my sell-by date for education. And the School of Media wanted someone who could teach research methods to their students. And I ended up then doing research. And the young people in the School of Media, because they're all lots of trendy young people in the School of Media, were kind of pushing me to get up to date with things, encouraging me to get on, they had to encourage me to get on Facebook, never mind Twitter. And then Twitter and to set up a blog. And they showed me how to set up a blog. And initially it was called Thought Control Scotland.
I remember, yeah.
I will defend that. My PhD, which I did at the age of 61, was about the work of Noam Chomsky, and it's based on Noam Chomsky's theory, which is the propaganda model, which is basically that rather obviously the media serve the interests of the powerful, and I applied that. I'd done research publications before, and I applied his theory, and I got the PhD. Now Chomsky has a book called Thought Control in Democracies, in which he points out that in say a dictatorial system like Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany, everyone knows that it's propaganda. They all know it's biased. They're never in any doubt that they're being lied to. But in democracies, there's a myth that somehow the media are free and they tell you the truth. So that's why I called it that. But several people told me that they were embarrassed by the title Thought Control. This is people that followed the blog and liked it, but they said they wouldn't share my articles with other people because the URL said Thought Control Scotland. They thought that was a bit paranoid. Conspiracy theories.
I kind of get that.
So that's why it became Talking Up Scotland.
It became Talking Up Scotland, and it kind of syncs with what got Fiona and I thinking about doing this particular edition on for Maybe Zai. Another thing that started it off was I got into a conversation on Facebook. It's a pro-indie group. Of late, there's just been such a lot of negative posting going on, and it's got several thousand members in the group, but probably only a few dozen people who post a lot. And and of that small number of people, a fairly high proportion at least at the moment, are posting quite negative stuff about SNP, about Scottish Government. Now, fair enough, there's a whole load of things going on that are, has overtaken SNP recently. So I'm not for a minute saying that shouldn't be discussed, but there's something about the tone of it that was just kind of like acid somehow, something that eats away at people. Anyway, the two women I got chatting to just on Facebook, they were saying how much it was almost at being distressed by it and thinking about leaving the group. So we had them on here and did a little chat with them just about that, and just about it's bad enough trying to counter all the bias that's there in the mainstream media, and then when we start kind of eating away ourselves within the Yes movement, that's another kind of problem that's maybe more of late, maybe I think the last year or so, that's kind of come a bit more. So
it's the same in research. There's a myth amongst researchers, at least there was in the past, a myth that you can be entirely kind of honest and objective and so on. And that we bring so many values and preconceptions to our professional roles that the idea of that kind of objectivity is just stupid. So there's a bit of a movement amongst, I suppose, the leftist researchers in higher education, who's just about surfacing the researcher. And that's where at the beginning of a piece of research you would actually indulge in a short piece of autobiography and an admission of who you are and where you come from, and then you present the research, and the people who read it, you treat them like adults by doing so, and they think, let them think.
That is such a better approach. I was just thinking in terms of think tanks that we were talking about earlier. People quote think tanks all the time, but you only have to look below the surface of a couple of them to see that they can be a very, very murky or very, very polarized origins. Who's funding them? Where is it coming from? And almost I wonder if an extension of what you're saying about government funding, it's almost starting to appear already with things like bylines, citizen journalism, and to an extent, most of the Yes movement. Imagine what the Indian media could do with even a modest grant that would set people up to actually be employed in it, as opposed to doing it in their spare time.
That model of applying for funding in the same way that various arts groups do. I've heard Leslie Ruddock talk about how something, it's not quite like that, but it's something similar in Norway, where local newspapers, small local newspapers, get a lot of funding, and they end up with a healthy media. I'm sure I'm sure around Oslo and another, I'm sure there's also national kind of newspapers and media there as well, obviously, but they have a quite widespread, a sort of a media that comes from the grassroots up, and it's there because it's encouraged by the Norwegian government.
They're also not owned by the country next door or further afield, are they? Norway is.
Of course, that's right.
Yesterday, I was in Edinburgh, and I walked from Waverley Station up to along Newington Road, and I was trying to pick up a national on the way, Sunday National, and I had to go to 6 shops before I found one that stocked it. So every single one before then, the only perspective on view is a unionist perspective from the country next door. There was nothing else to choose from. And it seems to me that is our basic problem, is just visibility. And especially if the latest poll of 53% for indie, more than half of us, we're being force-fed the opposite of what we actually want to know about. It's a ridiculous business model apart from anything else, but it's just so hard for us to get beyond that.
Well, it is a ridiculous business model, isn't it? And I mean, that's probably showing in the fact that the readership numbers are diminishing all the time. And I suppose you could kind of put a positive twist on it and say, well, if we can manage to get to 53% when that is the case. I mean, I was in a post office today posting a parcel, and I did have a glance at the newspapers. Well, the National wasn't even there. But, maybe it's imagine what 53% might grow to if there was a decently representative of our kind of way of thinking.
But if you're just going about your daily life and you're not particularly thinking politically, you're wondering what you're having for tea or whatever, subliminally, that's the view that is on display. So even if you thought, well, actually, maybe I lean towards yes, looking around you, you would think you were in a minority of one. And I don't know with a blog, I mean, how do you actually grow your blog? Is there something that you found successful in terms of getting visibility?
I think it's that business of being quick with something that's a surprise. I mean, that's classic newspaper stuff, isn't it? I suppose something that's just in and seems kind of important in some way. It's about something that resonates with people in terms of, things that matter to them in terms of their lives. And I don't have much control over that because I'm on the defence most of the time. If the stuff's coming in and I'm just, without really thinking about it, no strategy, no prioritising, I'm just batting it back. That's how I can. And I leave it to other people to construct strategies out of that. The business of the newspapers, I think maybe that's a lost hope. And it's maybe not a huge worry because, as we know, they're going down the tube, fairly fast in some cases. Social media, I think, is the place in which the independence movement has its strength and will continue. But there's one other issue, and that's one I've been at this a few times over the last few years as well. In 2014, STV were clearly not as imbalanced as BBC One were at 6 o'clock and 6:30. And I've recently I've done comparisons at times over the last few years, and I'm not doing a comparison at the moment, but I do watch them both. And while STV will often jump in with the same ill-informed rubbish on the health service and on the ferries and so on, there are times when a story is reported a bit differently from, Reporting Scotland compared with STV News, in which, and I think there's some scope, and you mentioned earlier about the business model, and I guess that's what is the case with STV. STV is not a state broadcaster, they're a business. They want to make a profit. They must know at least half their audience is pro-independence. It's bound to be influencing them, whether it's influencing them in some kind of clear strategy to exploit that balanced audience they have, or whether it's something, and I'm much more of a believer in these kind of deeper, semi-conscious cultural shifts than I am in conspiracies. And so maybe something has been happening with STV, and I think they, at times they push the 50-50 in terms of balance.
Are they completely independent from ITV? Are they a standalone business?
And I suspect they're not, but I think at editorial level they've probably got quite a lot of independence. I don't think they're motivated by any kind of ideology at all. I think they're a classic free market entrepreneurs here. They're thinking, what will people watch? And they have a bigger audience than Reporting Scotland do. Not much, but they have a bigger audience Reporting Scotland. That's part to do with the nature of the presenters as well. We're much more kind of affable and jokey. I think they're more likable to the general public than the Reporting Scotland come across a bit po-faced and huffy even at times. And so I think there's maybe some hope with it over the next few years.
I think that's interesting. I'd be happy to leave it to market forces, in the way you've been saying. If that's what's influenced, if that's kind of what's underneath some of STV's choices, because then, well, it's up to us then to make really good arguments and to make them in ways that are, attractive and, someone, an editor, commission an editor, or, just whoever will think, oh, that was good, let's get him on. I mean, I would kind of go along with that, really. Certainly better than, the national broadcaster. Yeah.
This is maybe a bit tangential as well. It's kind of related to that, but there's a business here, I think, of the BBC is clearly allied to the unionist model. It has to be. I mean, it's the British Broadcasting Corporation. Their jobs are at risk if we don't. Is that the BBC, from the time of Tony Blair, is aligned with the right wing of the Labour Party. They're not explicitly aligned with them, but they like where the right wing of the Labour Party stands, because there's a pretense of caring about poverty and inequality and so on, while at the same time still preserving the privileges of the bourgeoisie, still being able to send your kids to the best school, and of course they're all Europhiles. So the BBC, although they're scared about this and they have to be quiet about it, the BBC's establishment, the top professionals of the BBC loathe the right wing of the Conservative Party. Understandably, they fear and loathe it. because, as you have hinted there, the right wing of the Tory party would destroy them because they think they're lefties.
Yes.
And I think there's maybe something important in there in terms of our attack. You know, it's so easy to attack the Tories. So easy to, I mean, they're stupid and mad ideas, you know, they just
Vicious,
easy to attack, but they're not the danger. It's the centre right wing of the Labour Party, which is the danger to the independence movement. They're far stronger once they get in the power, and they will seduce some of our support, unfortunately. So we'll have to keep going for them, I think. Keep exposing the hypocrisies.
When you look at Starmer almost at the moment, who seems to be quite right of centre to me, and also Sir Keir is obviously part of the establishment in that way. The more I hear from him, the more I feel distanced from anything that he might stand for. And I think it was John Curtis said that if you take Labour Party members or voters and SNP, the thing we've got in common is we tend to share the same values. The difference is that the question of what's the best way of getting there? Is it independence or is it not? Whereas Starmer, I just don't feel any kind of kinship with at all. From his values to me are clearly in what I would have once called the Tory camp, but now, of course, they're so much further to the right that he's still able to call himself Labour whilst being quite Tory. That's where the real danger lies. And you look at Starmer and you think, really, is he that much of a danger?
Oh, I think that's true. I hadn't had that thought myself, John. But when you said it, that's more of a danger to us than the Tories. I need to go and have a wee think about it. But my gut reaction to that was, yes, that's right, because that's what can entice. That's the kind of part of the political spectrum that can entice people back to Labour. I don't think there was any other way to do it about it. It isn't really good to have one party in power for such a long time as the SNP have been in power. It'd be much better if there was an alternative. Let them go at the back, sit and work out how they want to, organise themselves. There are people now who've got a vote and who have had a vote for a long time, and they don't know anything other than having had an SNP in Holyrood. And, that means that they've forgotten, or they never knew, and then other people that did know but have since forgotten what it was like having, Labour, Lib Dem coalitions in Holyrood. And I think you're onto something there, actually. I think that's a kind of just a bit of a slope that people can, find themselves walking along thinking, oh, well, we could do that. And at the same time, if you have been in power for 17 years, have made mistakes. And when you've got a media who keeps pointing out those mistakes incessantly and exaggerating them, I think there's something to ponder about on that. Yeah.
I mean, I find it easy at times because the Tories keep saying these appalling things and telling these terrible lies. I mean, so I do get drawn into that in the blog, into rebutting them. But there are times when I think I'm wasting my time here because the Tory voters are never coming our way. Never coming our way, but a significant proportion of Labour voters could come our way.
Yeah.
So we need to constantly point, maybe do it in a constructive way. The other issue as well is humour. I try at times to be jokey about it on the assumption that there is some research, I'm sure, amongst psychologists, that one of the ways to weaken a rigid kind of psychological position is to try and draw it into humour, because humour softens the whole thing. I was reminded of I read a biography of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was a very tall man, and he wore a stovepipe hat.
Yeah,
he did it on purpose. And I gathered that when they would have meetings, so he'd arrive in the silly hat, and then sit down and have meetings, and he did self-deprecating humour a lot, and he found that actually reduced opposition. People actually stopped him and were more likely to agree to what he wanted to do. It was a control strategy. It was a cynical control strategy. He knew what he was doing. I gather the same thing happens with chimpanzees as well. Normally, chimpanzees are not the strong bullies. They're the ones who charm pals.
Yeah.
There was somebody once told me, if you look at three people who have done exactly that, they're messy blondes, they come across as harmless and funny, they make weird noises. The three of them was Johnson, Trump, and Jimmy Savile.
Oh.
Three of them, and, again, think of the damage that all three of them have done, and think of how they were able to do it. It was by letting people think that they were clowns and they were interesting, and we didn't know how to react to them because they were making these strange noises and doing these outlandish things, and all the time behind them there's an evil purpose, and they know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, sometimes I think it's just the way people are, and it's just a kind of pattern of behaviour they've learned from childhood. But sometimes it's a strategy, and I think with those three, you're right. It's strategy.
You mentioned Noam Chomsky. If he was advising us, the indie movement, what would he advise us to do, do you think? What would be the approach that he would suggest to us?
My daughter bought me a T-shirt which says, "What would Noam do?"
Oh, well, there you go. That's exactly the question. What would he do?
He's in his 90s now and still active, still on his feet, still going. I don't have heroes. Bob Dylan told me not to have any heroes way back, and I don't really have any heroes. But if I do have anything like a hero, it's Noam Chomsky. I think he's a public intellectual. He's the opposite of an ivory tower professor. He's someone who actually puts it on the line and has the courage to stand up for what he believes in. So I think he's my only hero, perhaps. What would he say? Noam Chomsky initially wasn't. He didn't really understand what Scottish independence was about. And I'd say this: I had an email exchange with him. I should have kept. We should have kept the emails now because such is his fame. I should have kept those emails, printed them out. But I haven't got them anymore since I retired. I can't find the emails. But in the emails, I emailed him because he'd been interviewed somewhere, New Statesman or whatever, and he expressed reservations about Scottish independence because he was wary of nationalism. And he has good reason to be wary of other kinds of nationalism. You see in other parts of the world, the non kind of civic nationalism that you find elsewhere, the ethnic kind. And so I emailed him and politely, I told him a few things. I said that the Yes movement in Scotland was very inclusive, and it was also broadly kind of anti-imperialist. You could argue it wasn't about Scots being better than everybody else. It was about us being as good as anyone else and being entitled to the autonomy. And I wish I'd kept the emails. He agreed with me. And then later on, I saw an interview with him where he kind of said what he and I had exchanged. And I felt really quite proud of that. But so I think, what would he say about what we should do here? Well, he's a major critic, of course, of the corporate media rather than the state, because there is no really powerful state media in the US. The corporate media do the job for them, really, in terms of maintaining the status quo. I think he would probably agree with what we're doing at the moment, and you just keep on going at it. It's like water on stone, the Amnesty International kind of view. Eventually we'll down. And well, there are many I know in the independence movement just now who are a bit demoralised with recent developments, and there's people saying, "Oh, it's not going to happen in my lifetime" and stuff like this, and people being quite negative. But it is quite a short time. If you look at the historical perspective, look at independence movements in the past, look at the other historical movements in the past, it's not been very long. We've been up and down. We'll be up again. And, I don't have any doubt. I mean, I do wonder about it in my lifetime, but I think it's going to happen. And I think the only way for it to happen is for us to just keep going, wearing away at the, that hard rock of resistance with what seem at times like ineffective contributions on a daily basis. You think, what good is this doing? I think over the longer period, I think it will.
Yeah, I think that must be right. I mean, we were at, or rather, I and a few other people were in Kilmarnock on Saturday, and that was a little local, very little, maybe about 50 people or so had gathered in Kilmarnock town centre, and they had some stalls, they had some speeches, they had some music, they had a raffle, they had face painting. We were there with the Yes slates. I don't know if you've seen those, and the Yes stones. And I thought, for all the majesty of an all under one banner march sweeping through Glasgow with 100,000 people, I mean, that's a sight to behold. But I bet there are more people in Kilmarnock town centre who would have noticed a whole load of happy people with flags right in the middle of their town centre. And that was just 2 hours organised locally. So, they would be coming up and they were, taking yes stones and asking questions and what have you. It was all very good-natured. And I thought, if you had that replicated in all the little towns, even, I live in a tiny town, if you did something here, more people would see that than are ever going to watch the Glasgow March. So I think, which is a long way of saying, I think you're probably right with your drip, 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 and the little things, 1,000 moments of truth that people experience.
I think you're right. I think those events like that can change people's minds because it's not confrontational. You're basically just offering an alternative. You're offering an alternative model, and it's a model that people can see as a positive, forward-looking, inclusive. And I think the hardest of souls sometimes can be softened by that kind of thing. So that you may have converted only a handful, but Kilmarnock's not an area we need to convert that many. To be fair, I say but you never know. There are people who are right against it, and they'll continue to right against it, especially if you attack them. And if you keep on doing what I do by saying, "Oh, you're wrong. Here's the evidence," they dig their heels in. But something subtle like that, which is not really kind of, it's not sharp edged.
Yeah, if you looked at it from the outside, it was just a little group of people having fun. It was very colourful. Everybody was laughing, having a good time. Yeah,
absolutely worthwhile, very worthwhile. I think. Yeah.
And that 53% in the most recent poll, that despite everything that's been thrown at us in the last 6 months, and what the media would love to see is the total collapse of the SNP and the total collapse of the S movement. Here we are on 53%. It's remarkable.
It seems likely to me that we'll climb further out of the dip we've had with the change of leader and so on. That dip was predictable, and unionists, of course, were jumping about with glee when they saw a couple of opinion polls. But all things pass, and that'll pass. We had a big dip in 2018. We went down below 40% on a regular basis, but we climbed out of that. So I think there's a hardcore in this which is not going away. Absolutely.
Totally.
I hope you carry on being part of that core of people who kind of keep dripping and carry on the blog. It must take a fair number of minutes out your day, but really hope that you carry on doing that. And
we're going to carry on stealing
this, and I'm going to carry on stealing it and putting it into our blog and making wee graphs out of it. So
there is no stealing.
There's no stealing. Yeah, that's true.
It's information handling. Information handling. All children should have those skills.
Thanks so much for coming and chatting away to us like this. Really, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it tremendously. Thanks very much.
Thanks. So there you go. That was a really interesting discussion with John, wasn't it? And if you'd like to see more of what he does, you can sign up on his website. You can get a daily posting, or you can follow him on Twitter. And certainly he gets thousands of views, but sharing them, let's get him another few thousand and get the messages out there. That would be great, because we've got so much to contend with. Although a little bit of good news this week was the fact that one of the arch nemesises of certainly the Scottish government, if not the independence movement, the Telegraph, has folded. Oh,
what a shame.
What a shame.
Maybe Boris Johnson will save it.
Oh, he's gone as well. Maybe Trump. Oh, wait, he's been indicted.
Oh, wait a minute. What about Nadine? Nadine, she could. Oh no, she's
gone.
Oh, she's gone.
So sometimes you just get a good week. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Yeah, thanks again.